I don't know what kind of a creature it takes to eat his way through a whole herd of wild boars. But that thing is killing an awful lot of big animals.
We Saw It by Glenn B. On a cool April morning between 5:30 and 6:30, my brother Alan and myself were on a morning run where we resided in Princeton. It was a common practice to hitch up the runners and jog a 3-mile route. Where you started, the finish would be the same place. That morning, a very fine flurry of snow was falling as we completed the last leg of our run. Towards the end of this jog, we were cooling down and walking quietly towards Princeton's Brown Bridge, when something caught our eye on the road ahead, maybe 100 or 150 feet away. I've never measured it off. Taking only a few steps to cross the 2-lane roadway, upright walking, this creature lifted itself up onto a single-lane gravel road we had used over and over again for running. Since then, a portion of that road has fallen away. We stopped dead in our tracks by what we were witnessing. A huge creature, hairy top to bottom. We just stared in amazement. As the hair raised up on my neck and arms, tears began to swell in my eyes, and the Sasquatch started to walk away from us, heading up the gravel road. To say the least, we were terrified. My brother, however, bless his heart, is very daring, and up to this point the creature had not seen us. But before I could react, Alan yelled out, "Hey!" We knew instantly we had startled the Bigfoot, and the huge thing swung around to face Alan's voice and our location. What seemed like forever, a standoff of sorts ensued. I don't know about Alan, but I was shaking. The dark eyes seemed to look right through us, its head tilting slightly to the left. The chest of this creature had what seemed to be a thinner coat of hair, not as thick. The same with the face at this distance, a lot less dark brown hair. It didn't appear to have much of a neck, and as mentioned, it walked upright at all times. Gathering itself, the Sasquatch then turned and began to walk up the gravel roadway. And Alan asked me, "What now?" I just wanted to go home. He wanted to follow the thing, but from a distance. We moved up slightly, watching as the creature rounded the bend of his departure, and we never saw it again. After that, almost 5 minutes of a brotherly argument ensued, and we noted a number of things to the incident. The skiff of snow was leaving tracks, and barefoot tracks, even after the time that had elapsed. We couldn't preserve them, however. My size 8.5 runner easily fit inside one of those tracks, with a lot of room left over on all sides. I'm 5'8" with an average stride, and I had to take quite a step to reach the next print. The Sasquatch was somewhat long-legged, with the arms swinging slightly. Overhanging brush came in contact with this creature, and upon my tiptoes and on one foot, I could just reach the small branches. Estimation of the Bigfoot size was probably around 7.5 feet tall. Weight, and God only knows that. A guess would be around 500 or 600 pounds. A very slight odor lingered in the area that morning. Needless to say, very little was said to anyone in our small town. Both Alan and I watched over our shoulders in the months to come. We spent so much time in that area that surrounds Princeton. We lived there for about 15 years, and Alan is now in the Vancouver area, and I reside in Calgary. The significant factor to this entire situation was my brother's boldness. If this thing hadn't turned around, we may have always wondered about the few options that came to our minds that day. We were faced with the unknown, and I can never forget those piercing eyes scanning for our whereabouts on the road. I admit it even today. I cried. The sighting lasted for approximately 45 seconds, but they were the longest 45 seconds of our lives. Skinwalker by Tracker337. As half Navajo and Hopi, I've had my share of experiences on and off the Navajo and Hopi res. I hope that I won't get any ridicule from any other Native American for saying this. One experience that I would like to share happened when I was 14 years old, and I'm now 29. This is an experience that I've only shared with a small number of people, and am now writing it down for the very first time. My brother, who was a hardened soldier, is still scared about what happened to us this particular evening. Now, on with the story. As a teenager, I would visit my grandma at her home on the Navajo Res for several weeks every summer. I loved to spend time with her, eat her delicious fried bread, and hear her tell us stories. Every so often, my grandma would hire a worker, the harmless town drunk, to do odd jobs around her house and property. One evening, right before the sun went down, I was asked by my grandma to take him home, which was about 4 miles out of the valley where she lived. I was more than happy to, seeing that I was only 14 years old and was asked to drive a truck. Mind you, on the res, nobody cares that you're only 14 years old and driving around. Hell, there's hardly anybody around to see you anyway. So my 9-year-old brother jumped in the truck cab with me with this worker, and my dog shared the tailgate of the truck, and we were off. After I dropped the worker off at his shack that he and his brothers called a house, we headed back down the road to Grandma's. As I mentioned before, it was evening and the sky was a deep red as the sun began to set behind us. We were leaving a nice dust trail from the dirt road, and the radio was playing music from the only radio station that could be picked up from the nearest town of Holbrook, Arizona. There was nothing unusual, nothing weird. It was at this time that my eye caught movement of something in the bushes a little up on the road to the right of us. I remember slowing down thinking that it was one of the many free-roaming sheep in the area that would dart out in front of the truck. As I passed where I thought I saw it, I sped up thinking nothing else of it. Then, out of nowhere, I just felt this dark feeling of fear and dread. I had no idea why I was feeling this way, but I definitely felt that something was wrong. As I play this memory back in my mind, there are only a few clear memories that I have of that evening. I clearly remember looking in my rearview mirror and seeing the dark silhouette of something very tall and very skinny that seemed to be covered in some kind of hair or fur, running behind the truck after us. Whatever it wasn't a normal human, or human at all. I remember hearing my brother crying and my dog barking ferociously at whatever was chasing us, and I remember speeding very fast and shaking violently as the truck bounced on the washboard dirt road. I distinctly remember that this thing was only getting closer, and my brother cried out, It's coming up on your side!" I remember being scared as hell and thinking, I don't want to die. At the moment that I thought would be our last, I remember speeding around a bend in the road and seeing a car coming towards us in the opposite direction. At that moment, I felt instant relief and felt that whatever was following us was gone. Shaken up but alive, we made it to Grandma's house wondering what the hell had just happened. We ran inside, not looking back, hoping that whatever was chasing us had not followed us home. As we told my grandma about our experience, she didn't seem too surprised, which surprised us. She continued by repeating stories that we had already heard at one point or another about black magic, witches, and something that the Navajos called Nadlushi, or skinwalkers. Needless to say, I didn't even want to look out any of the windows at all for the rest of that night, and as a matter of fact, I never drove on the reservation at night again until I was 21 years old. Without going too deep into explanation, I'll just say that these skinwalkers are evil men and spirits that use black magic for evil doing. I tell you that as far-fetched as it may sound, they're real. I believe that if God and His greatness are real, the devil is equally as real, and also has his ways of showing himself. Darwin River Dam Monster, submitted by Sugar. A while back, a friend and I decided to head out to the Darwin River Dam area to photograph the birds and ducks that abound out there. We were going to hit up Manton Dam first and then drive over to the Darwin Reservoir and make an entire day of it, from dusk till dawn. We arrived at the recreational area at about 7 a.m. on a Saturday, only to find that the park didn't open until 8, but after sucking up to a worker, he let us in early and off we went with our gear. My partner Mia, my name is Lucas, and I had our backpacks full with our lenses and also some food and large Nalgene bottles of water. It was summer and it gets pretty hot out in the Northern Territory. We found a secluded spot near the water and got situated to start shooting and had a grand morning with some great results. I was switching between my Canon EOS 1D and my EOS R mirrorless that I had just bought, and I was pleased with what I was coming up with. Around noon, we decided to make the trek over to the Darwin River, but went back into tumbling waters for something to eat first. Recharged and reviewing what we had shot, we were excited to get back out and burn some more batteries. We got to the area and parked, and then decided to kind of hoof it around the water to see what we could see. There were a few what I guess you would call bays that a lot of native birds called home on the north side, and to get there meant some bushwhacking, but nothing too crazy. We got settled in a space at the edge of the water and started clicking away with an eye out for crocs, as we'd heard reports of some being out here. I'd never seen one, but there were lots not too far away in the Berry Springs area, and we had to just be careful. Mia and I were getting down to our last bits of battery and decided to wrap up as dusk was settling in. We packed up our packs and stood stretching for a minute after being on our haunches for so long, and that's when Mia gasped a little, and I asked what was wrong. She just pointed across a little inlet to the other side of the water, maybe 20 meters away from us. I looked and realized why she gasped. This thing was standing in the water looking at us. And I say thing because it looked like a man, but it was covered in hair and had these really long arms that seemed to go to its knees. If I had to guess, I'd say it was about 7 feet tall, and as we watched it, it moved backwards to the shore behind it, and then it got down in a crouch as it never took its eyes off of us. I scrambled to get a rig out of my pack to take a picture, while Mia just stood there frozen. Then this thing picked up a rock and threw it at us, and this creature was strong as the projectile sailed way over our heads. Instinctively, we both ducked, and then another rock came, this time landing right off to the left of us. The thing started making this loud screeching howl, and more rocks came our way, and a hell of a lot closer each time. What seemed like a warning at first was turning into an assault, and whatever it was, it did not want us out there. I forgot about my camera, and another rock whizzed right by my head, so I just reached for my iPhone. Mia had already started moving away from our spot to get away from the flying rocks, and I turned to see if I could snap one shot on my phone, but by the time I got it out and held it up, the thing had gone into the trees. We could still hear it howling every once in a while, and Mia yelled for me to get going, but I really wanted to follow it and get a shot of it. I looked at Mia, and she was shaking and so scared I abandoned my monster quest and told her that, yeah, we ought to just leave. We started the short walk back to the vehicle, and this is when I started to get scared. This thing was following us, I am sure of that. The howls were getting louder and closer as we basically jogged through the trees back to a wide path. Finally, I told Mia to just run, and we took off, leaving the thing behind us. We got to the car and threw our stuff in and finally stopped to catch our breath. And there were some other people in the parking area, and they asked if we were okay. We just looked at each other, and in our silent gaze, we both made the decision to not say anything about what we had just gone through. I said everything was fine. We were running late for a dinner engagement, and we just got in the car and got out of there and never told a soul. Later that night in my studio, we went through every picture we took, but none of them showed the creature that we had seen. Was it the Yowie that everyone talks about, like Bigfoot and Yeti? I don't know, but we saw what we saw, that's a fact. If it wasn't a monster, then it was some crazy man out there, because the rocks it was throwing at us sure were real. I've been back there a number of times, but I never have seen that thing again. Creature in the Woods. In late August of 1995, I went on a trip to British Columbia for some outdoor adventuring with a friend of mine. One day, we took a canoe trip in Lake Kootenay, and after about an hour of rowing, we decided to go ashore for lunch. We were in a very remote and heavily wooded area around the lake, and we found a small clearing in which to spread out enough to eat. About 5 minutes later, we both heard some weird sounds coming from what sounded like a couple of 100 feet behind us. We had some hunting knives on us, but nothing else, and my friend was wary in case it was a bear or something. But, both being the curious type, we decided to push our way through the brush to see what was making the sound. It was like a deep, murmured growl. As we got closer, we could hear the sound getting louder, but couldn't see anything. The brush was really thick, though, and we figured we'd have to be pretty close to see anything. As the sound kept getting louder, we suddenly could smell this disgusting odor. It almost made my eyes tear up. Then all of a sudden, John grabbed my arm and didn't say a word. He just pointed, and before I looked in the direction he was pointing, I was looking at his face, and it was as though he had seen a ghost. Well, when I turned my head, I saw what caused his reaction. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was only about 20 feet away at this point, and the reason we hadn't seen it sooner was that it was bent down, kneeling above something. It looked like it was tearing a small animal apart and eating it. It was huge. We were both frozen for a few seconds, and luckily it didn't see us. We then started to back up without turning our backs on it, and got about 50 feet away when it stood up, turned, and looked right at us. It was at least 7 or 8 feet tall. I'm 6'4", and I weigh 260, and it was much taller and bigger than me. It was covered in dark, thick fur, similar to bear fur, and its face for the most part was furry as well, with just a bit of black, leathery skin on its forehead and cheeks. Its eyes were horrifying. We both thought it was going to kill us, and neither of us could move. We didn't want to turn our backs and run, because we were sure it would chase us and catch us in seconds. Then, suddenly it grabbed its dead meal off the ground and turned away from us and ran into the brush in the opposite direction. We turned and ran as well, straight back to our canoes, and I think the hair on my head was still standing when we got back to civilization and went to a coffee shop to talk about it and try to calm ourselves down. We passed a policeman on our way to the coffee shop, but we both agreed not to mention it to anyone. We both have good jobs and families and don't want to be looked at as loonies. Anyway, I'll never forget that day, and I know I'll never go into the woods again. At least not in British Columbia. We saw a Skinwalker, submitted by Amoeba Man. Please don't think I'm crazy, because I'm not. But me and my brother and cousin saw a Skinwalker when I was visiting them in Arizona. They're my cousins by marriage, not blood, and I am not native. I share in a lot of the traditions and such, but I'm as white as when white met bread. This was back in the 80s, and my family has long since left that area, but at the time, they lived in a town called Vernon on the Apache Res. My brother and sister and I lived with my parents in Bakersfield and would visit at least twice a year when I was growing up. I was 16 when what I'm sharing with you happened. It was Easter time, and we went out to celebrate with them, and my older cousin Who said we should go camping for a night at a lake about an hour away from their home. We begged and pleaded with our parents to go, and they finally said okay, but it was just me and my brother Ron and Who that were allowed to go. Who had this awesome old Jeep Scrambler that I loved riding in, and we quickly loaded up a bunch of stuff to camp, like a tent, stove, and stuff like that. We were psyched to be escaping the family for a night, and Who even sneaked some beer from the garage for us to have. At 16, I was feeling like an adult. We said goodbye to everyone and jumped in the Jeep and made the journey down to the lake campground. If you've never been out that way, let me tell you, there ain't shit out there once you leave a township. All the way to this lake, there was a whole lot of nothing. When we got there, the place was practically deserted. No one was there, and I guess maybe because of Easter, I don't know. The plan was to camp that Saturday night and be back for a big family meal that Easter Sunday. My cousins were very traditional, but also very religious too. So, we got a spot right on the lake's edge and put up the tent, and then went fishing right there at our site. We had stopped at a general store to get fishing permits for me and Ron, but Who already had his, and we spent the morning on this gorgeous lake fishing for trout, and Who said he'd show us how to make blue trout for dinner if we caught enough. We did catch enough, killed them humanely, and put them on ice in a bucket for later, and then we took a hike around the area watching out for spiders and snakes. Who was kind of like a god to me at this point in my life. I followed his lead with everything, from music to clothes. I mean, I loved my older brother, but Who just seemed to be larger than life. That trip, he amazed me by catching and holding these yellow scorpions without ever thinking they would sting him, and they didn't. That evening, we just hung out at our campsite, and Who did make blue trout and potatoes, and this is when things got kind of weird. Ron started asking Who about his thoughts on the universe and where we all fit in, and somehow that morphed into traditional native beliefs. We were all sipping on the beers and having a good conversation, but I got this feeling that something wasn't quite right. We had a nice campfire going, but I kept standing up and looking around, feeling like we were being watched. It was eerie, but I felt safe with Ron and Who. Around 10 o'clock, the beer made it to my zone and I had to take a pee, so I walked away from our camp to some trees and let the lizard spit. While I was going, I heard a noise to my right and looked over to see if it was a jackrabbit or something. But what I saw was not that simple. Standing about 50 feet from me was this tall and skinny man-beast, for a lack of a better term. It looked kind of like a dog. I mean, it had a dog face, but the body was human and really skinny and gaunt. After a while of me staring at it, it must have gotten the idea that I was there, because it looked over at me and then dropped to all fours and sniffed the ground. But all the while, it never stopped looking at me. I stumbled back to the fire, scared out of my mind, and interrupted Who talking to my brother to say what I had just seen. Who looked at me deeply and turned off his tape player that had been playing The Doors. He asked me to describe it again, and just as I was doing that, there was a rustle in the gravel off to the side of our tent. We all looked over, and at first it looked like a coyote or something, but I knew what it really was. On the fringe of the firelight, the thing stood up on its hind legs again. It was bigger than I originally thought. I mean, it was looking at us from over the top of our tent. It started to make these weird coughing, growling noises, and it stalked around the tent to where we could see it clearly, as plain as day. Who told me and Ron to get into the scrambler, and he picked up a 5-gallon bucket of water. While we got into the Jeep, he poured the water on the fire and then made a dash for the door. The thing let out this terrifying shriek, and Who just jammed the key in and floored it out of the campsite. I looked back, and this dog thing was chasing after us. It was running at top speed, keeping up with us, and to my horror, it actually ran so quick, it was soon running alongside the Jeep. Who got us back onto the highway, and the thing that had been neck and neck with us, scratching its clawed hands out at the windows of the scrambler, soon faded off to the side and was gone from view. We sped all the way back to Vernon that night and burst in the door, scaring the hell out of everyone. My dad and uncle took us all out to the garage and asked what the heck was going on. And we told them, and they and Who all looked at one another and nodded. "You boys go get some sleep," my uncle said, "and don't talk about this with any of the rest of the family. We'll go out tomorrow before church and get your things that you left." We all went back inside and had hot chocolate and then went to bed. My dad and uncle went out really early the next morning to get our gear, and then they came home. They never once mentioned the beer cans they found. They just got our stuff, and that was that. Okay, where was I? Okay. We all went inside and had hot chocolate and then went to bed. My dad and uncle went out really early the next morning to get our gear and then came home. They never once mentioned the beer cans they found. They just got our stuff, and that was that. A few years later, Who was visiting us in Bakersfield on a job interview he had in L.A., and I asked him about that night. He said it was a skinwalker, and that they didn't like talking about them. He said skinwalkers were native shaman who could turn into animals and bring harm to people, and that we were lucky to have gotten out of that campground without trouble. When I asked him for more information, he just said to forget it, and not to worry. He then laughed and changed the subject. That's a hard request, though. I can't just forget about it. The sight of that thing, its teeth, its raggedy hair, and its clawing at our faces in the Jeep, will forever be etched in my mind. Beast was stalking us. Submitted by Be Prepared Just In Case. When I was 14, I was in the Scouts and working on merit badges with my friends Pete, Randy, and Dennis. We lived in a little town in West Virginia, so a lot of the things we needed to do for outdoors badges was a snap. All of us came up through Scouts together, and now we were in the same troop. I know lots of people have issues with scouting or think it's for dorks, but I made Eagle Scout, and I learned a lot about many things, and I have never regretted what I've done. Anyway, we were working on our camping merit badge and had 2 more nights to go to finish it off, so we decided to hike out to the mountains behind Pete's grandparents' house and have a weekend camping trip. It was the fall, but still pretty warm out that year, so we packed pretty light and planned on sleeping under the stars in our bags. Pete said he knew a place with a rocky outcrop that was flat and went into the side of a mountain, so there would be an overhang too. It wasn't a cave, it was just a cut in the hill. Our parents dropped us off at Pete's grandparents with all the usual be safe jazz parents say, and we were ready to get going. It was a Friday afternoon, and we wanted to get to our camping spot fast so we could set up and get plenty of wood for a fire. Let me say this. Camping on your own when you're only 14 was such a big deal. Normally, we had a parent or 2 with us, but we were really good kids, and our parents trusted us to do the right things on our own, and we had a ton of freedom to do things just like this. We broke away from the older people, and Pete led the way to the place we were going to stay. It was about 3 miles away over a mountain, so it took some time to get there, and it was just as he described when we got there, a perfect place to camp. We looked over the duty list and everyone got to work on whatever chore they were assigned. I was fireman and cook that night, so I went to get water from a creek that was a few hundred yards back down the mountain, while the other guys set up camp and gathered a boatload of wood for the night's fire. Together, we got things organized and were laughing and joking the whole time while we made some camp crafts like a little table for preparing food and propping some logs up to use as benches around the fire pit. As it started to get darker, I had a fire roaring and was heating up water to make some soup, and we were roasting hot dogs over the flames. Dennis and I took the pot and cups from the soup back towards the creek to wash up afterwards, and we were making sure to do it far away from the actual stream to avoid contamination. By flashlight, we scrubbed everything clean and rinsed it all off in the dark and quiet of the woods. And then we heard it. A branch cracking very loudly a ways away from us. We looked at each other and I said, "If a tree falls in the woods," and we both laughed and got up to head back to camp. We stopped at the creek to get more water, and that's when we heard the knocking, like someone banging a heavy stick against another tree or something. That was weird. Dennis said we should get back to the other guys fast, and that's what we did. Pete and Randy were sitting by the fire talking when we came bursting back into camp and told them about what we had heard. "Probably just some animals, you guys," said Randy, and at that point we all agreed. We stayed up pretty late talking NFL and college football and chicks, and we finally got into our sleeping bags around midnight. When I woke up, the sun wasn't up that high yet, and everything had that bluish tint that mornings in the mountains always do. I loved and still love waking up in the woods. There's just something peaceful about it. Before the other guys woke up, I wrote down everything that we had done in my camp journal, and that's when I noticed something strange. We had left 2 propane lanterns on the makeshift table the night before we went to sleep, but now they were at different ends of the camp we had set up. I thought about it for a minute and figured one of the guys had put them there for a reason and just let it go. When the guys got up, I had no chores but offered to get water anyway while they got the fire and some grub going for breakfast. We had a good meal, and we were ready for some more bushcraft and a hike in the forest. I wanted a new walking stick, so my mission was to find the perfect one. As we wandered around, Dennis brought up the knocking sounds again, and then I asked about the lanterns. The guys all looked at me and said they didn't move them, so who did? That became the topic of discussion, and which one of us sleptwalk and actually moved the lanterns. I spied a stick that I thought would be perfect for walking, and that's when we came upon one of the strangest things I've ever seen. Where I saw my stick looked like some sort of shelter, but was really crude and just lots of heavy branches piled against a tree. "That's not an accident," said Pete. "That's there deliberately, and honestly, what a shit job they did of building a shelter." From one angle, it looked like a deadfall, but when we got closer, we could tell that the branches had been placed there with purpose. We talked about maybe another camper or hiker had built it quickly to get out of the elements, but didn't come up with anything solid. It was getting to be lunchtime, so we went back to the camp, and that's when we heard the first howl. We all stopped dead in our tracks. "What the hell was that?" I asked, and no one said a word. We listened, and again we heard it. It was far away, but we could hear it. At first it sounded like a deep air horn, but that certainly wasn't it. We waited in place to see if it would come again, but it didn't. We started walking again, and when we got to camp to make some sandwiches, Dennis was the first to say the word Bigfoot. "Oh, come on," said Randy. "There's no such thing as friggin' Bigfoot. What we heard was an animal or something. Give me a break." Dennis took offense to that, and I remember him going into all these books and TV shows he had seen about Bigfoot, that some of them build shelters, and some use knocking as a method of communication, and they certainly can howl. "You know who sees Bigfoot?" said Randy. "People on drugs or people that want attention. Ever see a picture or a video of one that wasn't super fake, or like the person was taking them wasn't having a conniption fit?" Everyone got into arguing about it, and the other guys were open to the idea of Bigfoot, which pissed Randy off. He asked me what I thought, and I told him I had no idea. That made him madder, and he went to get water from the creek. "You guys really think there's a Bigfoot out here?" I asked when Randy was out of earshot. "Maybe," said Dennis. "Why not? We've lived here all our lives and haven't seen a tenth of the mountains around our town. Who's to say there isn't something like that living out here?" "You think it's dangerous?" I remember asking. "Maybe we should go home." The guys didn't think so and said we shouldn't ruin the trip because of this, and besides, we really didn't know what was going on at all. Randy came back, and we let it go and just got to doing more scout stuff. That night, Dennis and Pete went to get water while Randy and I got the fire going. It was just dusk and starting to get darker when the two guys flew into our camp area breathing heavily as if they had just run up the mountain path with the water, which is exactly what they had done. "Oh my God, it's out there," said Pete in between breaths. "We are not kidding, man. Something is out there, and it's big." Randy told them to quit messing around and knock it off, but I realized they were really scared. I mean, really freaking out. Just then, we heard that howl again, and we all fell silent. "Guys," I said, "this is messed up." We all stood there looking at the fire and listening. "Let's get some food in us and chill out," I said. And we did, and kept an ear open for more noises. And sure enough, the howl came again. "Okay," said Dennis, "do we go home or what?" I said, "We have to go back exactly in the direction of where that sound is coming from." And everyone fell silent again. "Let's just stay here and get the fire really going," said Pete. "If it's a person, we can handle it. If it's something else, maybe the fire will scare it away." "Maybe it'll bring it closer," said Dennis. But he was outvoted, and we all built up the fire. It was dark by now, so we cranked it up and turned the lanterns on too. We tried to joke around and pretend nothing was wrong, but we were all pretty creeped out. Suddenly, a big branch came flying down from above us and landed on the edge of our camp area. We all jumped up, and there was a massively loud howl that felt like it was right in the camp. I took out my sheath knife and looked around wildly as a second branch came smashing down. "Get under the overhang," yelled Randy, and we dragged our bags and gear under it. The fire was at the edge of it, so while we were all scared, we still felt protected a little bit. Everything stopped. We all kind of just huddled there, barely talking, trying to hear if something else was coming. I got up to get more wood from our ample pile and put 2 logs on the fire. I remember standing in front of the guys about to say something when Pete yelled out and pointed at me. I spun around in time to see this gigantic black shape run right through our campsite and knock over one of the lanterns. This thing was huge. I was about 5'10" at the time, and this was well over 7 feet tall, and it stank. I mean, even while it was gone, it left an odor like a skunk rolled in garbage. I didn't say a word, but jumped back under the overhang with the guys, and all of us were visibly worked up. What are we going to do, you guys?" asked Dennis. "We're going to wait until morning and then make a break for it," said Pete. And we all agreed. I volunteered to stay awake and keep the fire going. It was all I could do to keep my composure and keep my mind off of what that thing was, and if it was coming back. The guys drifted off and I looked at my watch. It was 1:30 and morning was a long ways away. I got up to get more wood again, and I cautiously looked around our camp area. I didn't see anything. I went to our pile, and as I picked up a couple more logs, I scanned around again, and there it was, in the dark on the edge of the trees, watching me. I didn't scream or yell. I just stood looking at it. The lantern that had been knocked over was between it and me, and to this day, I can't say why I did this, but I did. I stepped over to the lantern, picked it up, and turned it off, all while staring at this giant thing that I thought could tear me from limb to limb. It made sort of a grunting noise, and just like that, it faded into the trees and was gone, and it never came back the rest of that night. In the morning, we cleaned up our spot, gathered up our stuff, and hurriedly made our way back to Pete's grandparents' house, where they made us a nice breakfast. We all swore to not say anything about what had happened and what we had seen. I never even told them about seeing the thing in the night while they were asleep. I don't live in West Virginia anymore, and I don't really talk about this at all. I found your channel and thought maybe you'd think it was interesting for a read. I made Eagle Scout, though, and I still have my medal. My friends have all gone their separate ways, and I don't really see much of them anymore. I do know Randy tells the story now. He never left our little town and has a drug problem, so no one believes his story he tells at the local VFW. The skeptics abound out there about things like this, but I know what we saw and what happened. We had many more trips in camping and scouting and otherwise, but I never saw anything like that again. Not the shelters, not the knocking, the howls, or anything. No matter what anyone says, I believe because I saw it. There is something out there in the mountains. What exactly it is, I can't say. But there is something out there. Hey gang, thanks for listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before we go any further, I'd like to announce the winner of the t-shirt contest giveaway. Our winner is Saturday Morning. Don't mind the baby in the background. I'm not recording this again. Saturday morning, you have won. Please send me an email, unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com, with the size t-shirt you would like and where to ship it. More t-shirt giveaways to come in the future. Also a reminder, Valentine's Day is right around the corner. I need your creepy, scary, messed up relationship stories for my Valentine's Day special. Send those and any other true scary stories you might have to Uncle Josh, truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please follow me on social media for updates of what's going on with the channel. All the links to that are in the description below. And consider becoming a patron of this page to support it. For as little as $1 a month, you'll have early access to all episodes and some other perks that I'm updating as we speak. Special thanks to Jen H. for being my latest patron. Welcome to the family. Everybody, be excellent to each other. Until I see you in the next episode, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. Or a little baby who is really intent on talking through my voiceovers.